others had not. So, like I said, it's been an interesting session. I've been involved in quite a bit over with the Virginia Chamber, the Coalition for a Strong Virginia Economy, Virginia Chamber execs, and other folks. But again, I'll let y'all talk about that. With that, let me just mention a couple things real quick. We did put our Harrisonburg-Rockingham COVID-19 Business Task Force together. You've seen information on that already. But I did want to point that out, that we do have a couple things that have been going on besides doing the grants. We also have a customer survey has been sent out. That's been closed down now. There are about 1,300 responses to that. We'll share that information a little bit. And then also we do have a business impact and recovery survey that has gone out. If you've not seen that, look in your newsletter for Monday, or we'll send it out again. Just, I guess today's Thursday. Maybe we can try to squeeze it in our email real quick this morning, so you can fill that information out as well. We shared that a little bit. I shared that some with Senator Warner yesterday on a call with a couple other folks. And we also have some information, again, going out to the people in the state who are doing some of the planning for recovery. We also have an economic recovery plan process that we've just started the other day. So we're working on that. So without further ado, let me go ahead and turn it over to Garrett McGuire, AT&T, who's been kind enough to sponsor our post and pre-session breakfast last 3 or 4 times. Garrett?
Yeah, thanks, Frank, and thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's safe and healthy out there during this crazy time. Thanks especially to our elected officials for making some time this morning. We know how busy you are. And like Frank mentioned, I'm very interested to hear on your thoughts on what was an interesting session and even more interesting reconvened session. So look forward to that. Just a quick couple seconds here regarding AT&T and our efforts during this time. We're certainly doing our part to alleviate some of the stress that and hardships that this pandemic is causing. Just this week, we've announced that we extended our Keep America pledge until July 30th, which means we're waiving data overage fees for wireless customers. We're waiving late payments for all wireless customers and DirecTV customers. And we are also not terminating accounts for anyone that is following the situation. So that's a big announcement from us. We've also just announced 3 months of free service for nurses and physicians who sign up for our FirstNet service, which is our FirstNet is our dedicated network for first responders. So if you know any nurses or physicians, feel free to pass them. Feel free to reach out to me for more information. And then finally, our store on Reservoir remains open for essential services. So everyone's communication and entertainment needs, feel free to hop on over there. We know that's very important during this time. So other than that, I just welcome everyone, and thanks for having me and letting AT&T sponsor, and look forward to it. And hopefully next time we can do it in person. Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Eric.
Thank you, Garrett. And just obviously the housekeeping items, if you're not talking, please mute your microphones there so we don't get any background noise. And then also, if you do have any questions, there is the chat. So go ahead and send the chat over, and Sarah will be coordinating that with both myself and our I'll call him our moderator today, who graciously stepped up to help me out here. So I'm going to turn it over right now to Quentin Callahan. Quentin actually is with Clark and Bradshaw. Most of you are out of town know Quentin. He's also the vice chair of our community relations on the chamber board. So let me go ahead and turn it over to Quentin. He can introduce our speakers today. And I'm going to go ahead and mute my microphone.
Thanks, Frank, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Special thanks to our legislators here. Frank said he had planned to moderate this, but he thought people may be tired of listening to him. So it's one of the few instances where I can say I've heard someone say, you know what, this may be better with a lawyer. So today we have Senator Mark Obenshain, Delegate Tony Wilt, Delegate Rob Bell, and Delegate Chris Runyon with us. The format is we're going to allow each one of the legislators to speak for about 5 to 7 minutes, introducing themselves, talking briefly about the session and their highlights and thoughts, and then we'll have questions at the end. So for the order, we're going to start with Senator Obenshain, then go to Delegate Bell, then Delegate Wilt, and finish with Delegate Runyon. So with that, Mark.
Quentin, thank you very much. It's good to be with everybody. I missed the chamber breakfast. This is my poor substitute this morning. But I also want to thank Garrett, AT&T. I appreciate your sponsorship of this. And there, I've lost everybody.
Mine went to
Dennis Cup. So I don't know whether everybody can hear me now, but
We can hear you, Mark, but it looks like you shared your screen and we got a bunch of emails popped up
It's like
or
Dennis.
something else. Oh, Dennis?
Yeah, that shouldn't be possible.
That's right. You keep on talking, Mark, and we'll figure it out.
all right. Well, Frank, thank you very much. And, you know, this was a fascinating session. And first of all, you know, we are experiencing some really distressing times. The community, I know, has come together in some really extraordinary ways in order to be able to address the massive shutdown that we're experiencing. It's put a lot of stress on a lot of businesses, on local governments, and quite frankly, some of those stresses are going to be things that we're going to be dealing with over the course of the next few years. You know, some of the community efforts that have come together. I know that the U.S. Chamber of Commerce has put together an emergency fund. They put up some money that ran out really very quickly, but it was important to help a lot of small businesses around America. Here in Virginia, there are a number of community efforts. There's one called the Virginia 30-Day Fund that I'm part of. We're making grants to businesses in communities across Virginia. I've made several $3,000 grants here in Harrisonburg as well. If you haven't seen the newspaper today or seen the news from last night, the governor did lift some of the restrictions that have been enforced for the past month or so, and we're going to be able to resume non-emergency medical procedures starting Friday, which is, I hope, a step in the right direction towards safely reopening Virginia's economy. We certainly need to be cognizant of those in our community who are vulnerable, and I think that there are ways that we can do that while reopening our economy. You know, Quentin and I are lawyers, and it's, you know, kind of hard to meet payroll if lawyers can't go to court and serve their clients. And so I know that many on this phone call, Zoom call, are experiencing some of the same challenges. Some of these challenges, I fear, are going to be exacerbated by some of the things that we did during the General Assembly session. And, you know, I don't know whether we're going to be able to address those either in a special session or next year, but Frank mentioned some of the business challenges that have been erected during the General Assembly session. Some of these are things that have been brewing for a long time. Organized labor has a national agenda and brought many components of that national agenda to Richmond this year. I fought for years with Rob and others to make sure that, you know, Virginia businesses have a fair shake in public contracting, and I fear that we've taken a step back in that regard. We repealed legislation that prohibited public contracts from requiring project labor agreements, basically union-only deals for construction, primarily for building construction, road construction, and other projects. That's going to cut, frankly, a lot of our Virginia businesses who have done a lot of the contracting out of jobs, and it's going to raise the cost of construction for a lot of these jobs. We also adopted basically a Virginia counterpart to the Davis-Bacon Act, in which folks who are contracting with the state are required to pay what is called a prevailing wage. It's really United States Department of Labor published wage rates, which coincidentally happen to be pretty darn consistent with union wage rates. And again, that is going to give large out-of-state union contractors the ability to compete for jobs here in Virginia that they've never been able to compete for before. And a lot of our local companies have really thrived on construction projects that or on college campuses or road building and other projects that they're going to have a harder time winning those bids for in the future. Another piece of legislation that passed is minimum wage bill. And, you know, we all want better wages for our employees. And the objective of the minimum wage agenda has been to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour across Virginia. And we took the first step in that direction this year. And I'm very concerned about that. I think that it's maybe a little myopic to suggest that what the market can bear in Northern Virginia is also what the market can bear in the Shenandoah Valley or South Side or Southwest Virginia. And I'm deeply concerned, particularly coming on the heels of this governmental shutdown and whatever aftermath we experience, that it's going to have a pretty devastating impact on a number of small businesses and frankly upon some of the people who are entering the workforce, folks who've graduated high school, young people, people without skills who need those first job experiences to understand the workforce. For employers out there, you're going to need to take a look at some of the employment law changes that we passed this year. There are anti-discrimination provisions, and I certainly support equality in the workplace for everybody, irrespective of any classification. But these laws really are going to change the landscape in terms of the expanded categories of protection that are provided, but more importantly, some of the expanded remedies that have been provided. The Virginia anti-discrimination provisions, quite frankly, provide more attractive remedies than Title VII under the federal law. And if anybody's been involved in a Title VII suit, this is perhaps, I fear, Title VII kind of on steroids, and it applies to smaller businesses than Title VII applies to. So, that's just kind of a little bit of an overview of some of the business legislation. I don't want to take my colleagues' time. I'll let them hit on some of the other pieces of legislation. Rob, I know, is focused on some of what's happening in parole and criminal justice, and I'm deeply disturbed by some of the developments there over the course of the past 2 or 3 weeks. I'm sorry, Emmett's not here. Emmett is the unparalleled expert on state budget, and I'll be happy to do what I can to answer any questions about the budget. But thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be with everybody. Look forward to seeing you live and in person sometime soon. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Mark. We really appreciate that. Of course, a byproduct of this digital version and switching between 2 screens, I forgot to formally introduce Mark. He's a senator from District 26, is a local attorney with the Obenstein Law Group, and he's been serving in the Senate since 2004. With that, we'll switch to Delegate Rob Bell, who serves the 58th District. He's also an attorney and has served as a state prosecutor for 5 years and has been serving in the General Assembly since 2002. Rob, you now have the floor.
Morning, everybody. So I wanted to echo some of the things Mark said and then provide some additional information. If you are puzzled or surprised by what he described as having happened, you should be. This is the most consequential session, people are saying, of decades. It certainly is the most consequential of my tenure. And if you're wondering why, there were some changes this year, and let's just sort of go through them quickly. The biggest, of course, is that there was a change in majority, so that Democrats won a majority in both the House and the Senate. Now, the Senate has gone back and forth during my tenure but this is the first time that the House had a Democratic majority. So that was something new. The second, probably more important, is that this, by getting a majority in the House and the Senate, the Democrats had a majority in both the House and the Senate governor's office. And you might think, okay, well, that's the way this works. It's not. I've been there 19 years. In my 19 years, there'd only been 2 years where one party had all three places. And if you have, doesn't matter if you've got 2 of 3, you need a 3 of 3 to pass laws. And so that always had a, let's say, a calming effect, that no matter what one party wanted to do, they had to get it past the other party. This was the first time we had since the second McDonald 2 years that one party controlled all 3 boxes, if you will. And then the third thing was a lot of the new chairman, people running the place, had not done it before. So leaving aside the party, leaving aside, excuse me, that one party controlled both houses, you had new chairmen, new procedures. The poor lobbyists and your representatives down there were running around trying just to figure out literally what would pass, what could pass, what couldn't pass, the size of the strike zone, we call it. And so all of those things happened. Now, if you liked the way Virginia had been headed, and we had, after great effort, reattained our #1 ranking for business, you were happy with the way things had been. If you were ready for big changes and didn't like it, what happened? This was a rare, in fact, unique opportunity to get a lot of things passed. So that's what Mark was talking about. There was a conscious effort, I would argue, to tear down many of the things that made us the #1 business state in the country. And I'm not saying that, obviously, I think it's bad news, but I think it's a fair description. And what you have, the way we attained our #1 business ranking was not one big vote. It was a succession of dozens of little votes, little cuts, little things that made it more expensive for you all to hire people and make a profit. And one by one, those were attacked just in seriatim, one after the other in Richmond. And so Mark identified several. There's the minimum wage proposal that was passed, and it was delayed slightly. There was a 4-month delay from the original bill and the reconvened session, but that is now going to be the law of Virginia. And it has a stepwise increase in the minimum wage. Efforts to do things like have a regional minimum wage differential were defeated, so this will be a statewide minimum wage as it phases in. Mark identified a couple of the priorities of the labor unions, both in terms of requiring prevailing wage, which means you got to pay the prevailing wage, which makes unions competitive when they weren't before, project labor agreements. They also passed a bill to allow collective bargaining for public employees. And so that's going to travel around the state. There is a $1 billion tax increase that's coming your way. We made it easier for counties to raise taxes. It used to be they had to have a referendum for restaurant taxes and the like. That's gone. There's other taxes that are coming. There's transportation taxes that don't directly affect you as much, but are in other parts of the state. Goodness, we have increased energy taxes, energy costs. Some of the green proposals will significantly increase energy bills, both for residential and for business. And I think if you add all this up, you will certainly see we are going to tumble in the business rankings. Now that's just a ranking, but I think it's a fair understanding of the difficulties you all have going forward. The second worry would be they're not done. The nature of politics is people always ask, what have you done for me lately? And so I think notwithstanding all of the things that were done this year, you can anticipate a similar approach next year and the year after that and the year after that. So this was a dispiriting session for those of us who consider ourselves pro-business or conservative or fiscal conservative. Just many of the things we thought were either important or even untouchable were not untouchable at all. I think that you can anticipate a direct assault on the right next year. And certainly it appears that they have a lot of the votes they need. The governor has been sending mixed messages on that. So, okay. There were a couple of questions that came up directly in the that we were asked to talk about. And the first was I-81. I think that I'm not on the money committee, that probably is by them. There was, however, a question about education. And I think we're starting to see, if you're watching the headlines, the impact of COVID on this. So I looked it up just a minute ago. So if you don't know this, your funding for your local schools is a combination of state and local funding. Each locality has to put up a little bit, and then rich localities have to put up a lot, and it's something called the composite index. And I'm summarizing, but it's the percentage of the base costs that have to be paid by the locality. Fairfax has to pay 80% or something like that. Very poor localities can pay as low as 20. And then you're right in the middle. I had it written down. You're 37.9. So essentially 38% of the costs are borne by Rockingham and the rest are borne by the state. I would encourage anybody who is involved with that at the local level to be as conservative as you possibly can be. The revenues projections that we're seeing are disastrous, and the disastrous statewide, disastrous at the local level. Any new funding, so some of the pay raises that were baked into the budget, they're gone. And then we will, education gets priority in the state budget, but we need to be prepared for the amount of money that's coming to be lower than what everybody was hoping for or even expecting. So I think that's true for the K-12 level. And then of course, JMU is a huge local driver for the economy, and no one knows what the plan is yet for the fall. All of us certainly are hoping and encouraging the governor to do what he needs to do to get us back to, that would be August, have all the students come back. But at this point, no one quite knows. And I represent both sides of the mountain. I'm over in Charlottesville also. We're having the same issues over at UVA, which is just no one's quite sure how the fall is going to proceed. So that's the education funding. And then there was a question about redistricting. Redistricting is the decennial effort we have to draw the lines for the various districts. And if you're following the debate closely, last year when no one knew what was going to happen, we passed a nonpartisan commission, and it would have to go in the Constitution. And so the big question was, we passed it when there were Republicans and Democrats in charge. What would happen once the Democrats had the majority in all bodies? And to the surprise of some, a coalition developed that did in fact pass it in the Senate and the House. So that measure will go to voters this fall in the election, and if it passes, that's how the redistricting lines will be drawn. So with that, I will yield the floor to my colleagues. I do have a conference call, and I will disappear for a little bit, and then I'll come back when it's over. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Rob. We really appreciate that. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Delegate Tony Wilt, who represents the 26th District. Tony's involved in his family business at Superior Concrete. He's a past chamber chairman, and he's been serving since 2010 in the General Assembly. Tony, you have the floor. Thank you, sir.
Hey, thank you, Quentin. And Frank, Sarah, and Quentin, thank you for continuing to have us legislators in, after session and even before. We're anxiously looking forward to that later in the fall. Hopefully everything will be back to normal. And I do want to echo thanks to Garrett for hosting the event. I think it's very important for our business partners throughout the valley and our area to be up to speed. Hopefully you kept up with the goings on in the legislature, but these are always good times to just have a recap. And so I really appreciate you pulling this together. And so I just echo some of the comments that Mark and Rob touched on. It was an interesting session. Couple of the Rob especially touched on it. There was if you'll remember, some of us, touted the fact, comments that were made from the other party that if they were to win the majority, that they would fundamentally change the state of Virginia, and they would do it in short order. And they were true to their word, from stem to stern. They had, they enacted all kinds of those things, I guess you could say, that were pent up in their view of how Virginia should be run. They've been pent up for the last 20 years, and so they didn't fool around and starting to enact some of those bills. Broad level, it was interesting to me that they didn't have a bill that they weren't in love with. I just trying to be objective when the Republicans were in control. I know, but to be honest, bottom line, I had better legislative success this year than I did under Republican majority. Now I credit that to the bills, but still looking overall, I think the Republican Party was more critical thinking and more objective and willing to say no to our own people. Case in point, last week in the reconvene session, there was an issue before us, came back from with the governor's amendment. And while we were meeting in our tent, that bill was defeated twice. But one of the majority party voted with us. So, and kind of a rule that we have is if the prevailing vote can call the vote up again. And so they did that. They saw it go down the first time, and it came up the second time. One of them did. They brought it up, and then we went into recess, and they took that time to address some of their wayward members, if you will. And suddenly, the third time it came back, it passed. And so that was indicative. Saw that even in the subcommittee and at the full committee levels. There were some things that were passed through that. So it went to the whole idea to me that they just they found it very difficult to say no even to themselves. And that was telling. Another thing that concerned me, big view in the session, I mentioned the subcommittee and committee. There was on a number of contentious issues that I saw firsthand, and I'm sure others did too, that there was just a real lack of discourse, discussion, testimony, if you will, and I will, like on the business issues, Mark and Rob's already touched on those, but I do want to take just a moment to commend the Chamber of Commerce membership. If you have any questions, please know that your representative in Richmond was there when we were hearing these onerous bills that are going to be harmful to businesses in the state of Virginia. And so, when a bill's presented, they say, anybody wants to speak in favor, please line up. And my goodness, in opposition to these, there was a line of folks back the aisle, 15, 20 people oftentimes. Sadly, what we often saw was just a real, it just basically cut off debate, cut off the opportunity for folks under the guise of, well, we've heard this before. And so, well, heck, there's a lot of new members right there on the subcommittee or in the full committee. This was their first year in, and they had never heard the arguments. But so, it was very evident that the outcome of the legislation was predetermined. And so that was very disconcerting to me. But I will say, I started to say, be proud and please know that your chamber representation was present. They were on the floor, gave you a voice when it came time to hear these bills. And so, we tried to make the plea from a business standpoint of what the potential outcomes are going to be on these pieces of legislation. But, the majority is in charge. So that's what we saw in often cases. So, yeah, back big view, there were some major areas that we saw, a lot of movement on. Again, Mark and Rob touched on business. There's areas of public safety. I know that Mark and Rob could go into more detail from a legal standpoint, well, a lot better than I could or can. But some drastic moves there in public safety. It was touched on earlier. Energy policy, elections. There's another area that these are some big issues that the now majority party was committed that they were gonna redo and upend, and they sure did. And so the effect of that is Rob stated earlier, Virginia up into this session was ranked number 1 to do business in, and we're going to see how that. I don't wish you. Please understand. I want, if their policies are better, it'll be proven out, and I'm first to say, okay, I was wrong. That was a good idea, and so I don't want to see Virginia fail. But I think, and ironically, an example. I think it was Mark that touched on some of these anti-business pieces of legislation. So last week, I mentioned earlier, we were at reconvene session or veto session last week, and these bills came up, one after another, and it was basically laughable. Okay, as the ones that got up to speak to the governor's amendment. His amendment was they were to take effect January 1, 2021, right? And the amendments pushed it back to May. And so somebody has to get up and speak to the bill, right? And so they were in the majority. And so it was the folks on their side of the aisle that get up and spoke. And honestly, it was yeah. If it wasn't so serious, it would have been comical to see their trying to defend the fact that the argument that we made from the very beginning. These issues, these bills are troublesome and are onerous to businesses and to the state of Virginia. They are currently. And so these folks got up and tried to tell us why it's such a good, they're postponing it. The governor's concerned because of the damage it's going to, the pain it's going to cause to businesses. So they're going to postpone it for 4 months. And folks, a delay is a you're only delaying the inevitable. And so, the pain's good. He pushed off the pain, so to speak, for a few months there. So it was just, but again, they were in charge and they had their will, and so we'll see the outcome of that. So that was a pretty broad view. I'll stop so we can get to some questions.
Thanks a lot, Tony. We really appreciate that. Now I'm going to turn it over to Delegate Chris Runyon, who represents the 25th District. Chris is the owner of Eddie Edwards Signs. He's a past chamber chairman, and this was his first session in the General Assembly. Chris, you have.
Thank you, Quentin. And I want to thank everybody for coming out this morning. I know everybody's not a morning person necessarily, so thanks for starting out the day great here with us. So it was a great learning experience. It was fascinating. It's also very concerning. And my colleagues have touched on the legislation, and there's more. There's energy legislation that there was one bill that's going to raise our monthly electric bills approximately $23 a month. Or some of the numbers presented, but there's dollars and dollars and dollars that's going to be added to good, hardworking citizens of the Commonwealth that I'm not sure that they can afford. And then, as we move in through this COVID and this recovery, the economists all say we're going to have a long, hard road of recovery ahead of us. It's going to be tough. And when we went to the General Assembly, there were two things that we had overall that we wanted to achieve. One was to learn the process and reach out and build the relationships with people on all sides of the aisle, including the administration and including the folks that run the organizations down there. And we've got some fabulous people that work for the Commonwealth, very competent and capable, and you really enjoy building those relationships so that we can achieve things that are important to our citizens and to our community. That's our goal, is to enact legislation that improves the lives of all folks in the Commonwealth. My biggest takeaway coming from here, and recognizing that I'm a newbie at this, but my biggest concern, and Tony touched on it, is there's a lot of legislation that come July 1st or January 1st is going to impact our lives. It's not mature. And when I say mature, it was not debated, it was not vetted, it was not had conversation, it was steamrolled. And it was legislation that is going to benefit certain special interest groups. There is no doubt that it will benefit those people that side of the aisle wish to reward. But what it's going to do is going to impact that person, that mom that gets up every morning and gets her kids off to school and then goes to work, because she's going to have higher taxes to pay, whether it be at the pump or whether it be on the other areas. It's going to impact the school systems in the rural areas. There was some legislation passed that early in the session, I had several superintendents call me up and say, hey, you guys are really putting me under pressure. I don't know that I can afford to do the things that you all are asking us to do. And so that was my biggest takeaway from the session, in that there's going to be stuff that we're going to be really unhappy with. And I was encouraged to hear some of my colleagues talk about that we may have opportunities in special sessions or certainly in future sessions to adjust some of that back. There are some folks on the other side of the aisle that maybe have recognized that they have significant overreach, and whether it be business issues, which this group is pretty much in front of, or other constitutional issues. One of the things that I think we're real proud about is the redistricting. That there were people that I think there were 8 or 10 in the House side that Democrats had voted with the Republicans, and I think every Republican voted for redistricting commission. And what that does, it puts the rights of your representation in your hands. You get to decide who's going to represent you as opposed to the other way around. That's a good thing for all of us. Some other things in particular, we were very pleased to be able to collaborate with various members in the House on legislation. There was a contractual liability issue that I worked with Delegate Hurst and Delegate Kilgore. So there's 2 Republicans and a Democrat that adjusted a long-standing issue relating contractual liabilities on state contracts. We were pleased to be able to work through on that. ARC of Virginia asked me to carry a bill that dealt with developmental disability education components. We were very pleased to have that bill go through, and it was signed, and as a freshman, not all freshmen get bills passed, so we were very pleased with that. My bill disappointment, Tony talked about, you to be careful not to fall in love with your bill. Well, I did, the milk bill. You know, Barry Knight, who was the chief co-patron, allowed me to be chief co-patron along with him on that. It was to recognize the definition of milk, and it was done to support the dairy industry. The dairy farmers, you may be surprised to know that dairy farmers' suicide rate is 5 times the national average. And they've had a tough time for the last decade or so in making their businesses work and in the environment they're in. And so we felt like that was just a good way to recognize what they do and give them an opportunity to be economically successful. So disappointed, but you know, on an overall point of view, the Valley, we're kind of betwixt and between. We're not as rural as many parts of Southside and Southwest Virginia, but we certainly are not urban. And so we're kind of that, like I say, betwixt and between. But the milk bill, the lack of support by the governor and the administration, and then a fair number of Democrats, show that rural-urban divide. And it shows the disconnect that our current leadership has with what's important in our rural communities. A couple other things. I would like to specifically commend a couple of groups of folks for what has been going on the last 8 or 10 weeks with COVID. And I think many of us are business owners and we participate in the PPP program. I see several bankers on here, and I know they've been working their tails off. But not just the bankers, but financial advisors, the accountants. Here you are in the middle of tax season, and this new federal program that they were making the rules up tomorrow to apply today, they're having to deal with. So those folks have worked so hard and really made a difference for our business community, and I want to commend them. As with our first responders, our medicals. Senator Obenshain and I were talking, I think yesterday, you know, somebody that's an unsung hero of the whole circumstance here in the Valley is those folks that get up and raise animals, milk cows, grow crops, and those folks that get up and they haul feed, or they run a hatchery, or they work in a processing plant. And I was talking to a distribution manager for one of the poultry companies yesterday, and he said his folks and him got together and they said, what's different today when you walk into Walmart? And they say, you see meat cases that aren't completely full. We're the ones responsible to make sure they're full. We've got an obligation to all those folks in our community, in our Commonwealth, in our country to make sure they get fed. And so those folks that get up every day in a difficult situation and get out there, I want to commend them. I want to thank everybody. It's been a great opportunity, and I look forward to answering any questions that you folks might have.
Thanks a lot, Chris. We really appreciate it. So we have a couple questions. We'll throw it out there. Somebody wants to take the lead, please jump in. One of the first questions is an issue that was a big issue going into the session, something that is not as big an issue right now with the coronavirus taking over all the media, and that's 81 improvements. So transportation was a big issue going into the session, then it seemed to take a back seat. Are there any updates about 81, how that's going to affect our area?
let me start. 81 is still is a priority. I know it is for the administration. I know it is for the folks who are on this, legislators who are on this call. Chris in particular, and Tony, I know Rob as well, but Chris has participated in this effort on both sides of the divide as a citizen activist last year, business leader, and down there working as legislator this year. But the 81 improvements are going to be funded largely by gas tax, and we're all, a little bit concerned about the impact of the shutdown on gas tax revenues as well as everything else. But for the most part, the improvement program for 81 is it's a bonded program. The bonds are going to fund the long-term improvements, and a 2 or 3 or 4 or 6 month downturn in gas tax revenues shouldn't have a dramatic impact upon the overall timing and funding for the improvements that are in the pipeline. We all want 81 to be fixed when we wake up tomorrow morning, and it's just not going to happen overnight. These projects are going to take years, but many of them are already underway. I don't anticipate that the timing for the entire 81 corridor improvement program is going to be significantly altered. I think it's going to continue to move forward, and we're not going to see significant delays.
Thanks, Mark. I appreciate that.
Yeah, I would add, to kind of to dovetail there with what Mark was saying is, for folks to realize that, the projects that are really moving big dirt, right? They take a while to plan. And so that's I'm asking folks not to get disgruntled. These things don't happen overnight. That it's, now you got to do environmental studies, land acquisitions, all those things that take a long time. And so, and fortunately, VDOT's still able to work on those things as we speak to set the stage, if you will, to really start making some improvements. And I'm happy to say, I know that the senator and I sat on the 81 committee, and we pulled hard from the very beginning. Said, hey, and the facts bore out. When you go and some of the study that VDOT did, looking at pinch points, accident spots, all that tied together. We got a real problem here through Harrisonburg and through our part of the county. And our area is right there at the top of the list. And so, we were going to fight for that. And it's easy to do when the statistics show that, y'all really need some help there sooner rather than later. So we're slated to get our work done, but it's going to be a little bit. You're seeing already some efforts. I mean, there's the easier things, signage. You're seeing some, the electronic signs out all along the message signs. We're seeing the improvement there at the Port Road exit. Those of you that have seen that work going on, hopefully you've seen the plan. What they're doing is realigning that exit ramp off of 81 North, and it will go up in a line with the light between the bookstore and the gas station. Right, it'll line up, and so it'll eliminate one of those lights that are really close, and so that's just an easier thing to get done than the really big, vast improvements. But we're still moving in that direction.
Great, thanks a lot, Tony. Several of you spoke about minimum wage and the impact that bill had, and the effect of COVID related to minimum wage. Can you give us some more detail about the rollout? What dates and amounts can we expect going forward?
Yeah, I'm happy to try. There were many proposals that were introduced at the beginning of the session. Some were very, very aggressive. All of them have a couple of shared characteristics. I mean, they are all designed to put us on a trajectory to have essentially a Seattle-style statewide $15 an hour minimum wage, essentially for everybody. And my friend and Democratic colleague from Fairfax County, Dick Saslaw, expressed amazement that there's actually anybody in Virginia who's not being already paid $15 an hour. And to me, that just shows a tremendous disconnect between some of our friends in Northern Virginia and the rest of Virginia. There are an awful lot of folks who are entering the workforce at lower wages, and a lot of employers who just can't make that jump to $15 an hour. At the end of session, basically there was a slowed down trajectory. I can't, the first step, I think, moves it, Chris, what, to $9.40?
I'm looking at the bill summary, 950 January 1st, 2021.
And it's bumped back.
Yeah.
Bumped back to May of 2021. And, you know, there was a bit of a divide in the business community over how to address that. The Chamber of Commerce, the NFIB, virtually every business group went to the governor and said, please veto this, or at a minimum, put what's called a reenactment clause on it, so that that after the COVID-19 shutdown, we can come back next January and decide whether this continues to make sense for Virginia. The governor instead added an amendment delaying for 4 months the implementation of the increase in the minimum wage. And there a bit of a divide developed. I happen to believe, and I think most of my colleagues on the call today believe, that what's bad in January is going to be bad in May. And we wanted to bounce this back to the governor and ask him again to please veto this, or please put a reenactment provision on it. We were not successful in that effort. And as a consequence, it and most of these other business changes will take effect on May 1 next year.
Yeah, Quentin, and to further along, you said something about a schedule. So yeah, as the senator said, 950 May 1, 2021 goes to 11 January 1, 2022, 12 2023, 13 2025, and 15 by 2026. So that's the schedule, the plan, if you will, is the way the legislation is written. And yeah, are we going to be able to do that? Sure we are. Yeah, it's with disregard, again, to where the Virginia stands as far as the state, our ranking to do business. So I guess there's people, obviously, to me, there's people there in the legislature that doesn't matter to them. But I would say, we have to consider, how do you draw in business? That's what we're about in the state, because it takes revenue to do the things that everybody wants to do, all the niceties, and then to build schools and to do all those kind of things. It takes tax revenue, and it takes vision, and it takes reasonableness. And so, obviously there are some that doesn't care if we're ranked down with Maryland or California or something like that. And, when we look at the physical situation of states like California, it would pay us to take note of where they stand right now. But that's a discussion for another day. But, we much prefer allowing a strong economy until this COVID. I mean, look how the nation, we were rocking it. People were not enough employees. A strong economy is what raises all ships. A strong economy is what raises wages and benefits. And I'll bet you about everybody on this conference this morning has experienced that. I know our business has. You know, if you want to get good people, you've got to raise those wages, those benefits. That's what we were all doing. And it benefits the employees versus a heavy-handed government that comes in and starts dictating to you, regardless of your business plan. And we all like to talk about small business and taking care of small business. Honestly, there's some out there that have no clue what small business is, and it was evident by their vote. And you know, these kind of actions are going to be devastating to those businesses. They've started, you know, they've got their business plan, what they can afford to pay, what other help, what kind of benefits, what can they pay for product and so forth to resell or to manufacture, you know, raw goods and so forth. When we start interjecting these kind of you know, numbers into people, you know, we're throwing their business plan to the wind. And that's what's going to, you know, potentially cost jobs and cost businesses.
Well, you know, if I could add on, this is a great example of one of those pieces of legislation that's not mature, didn't have adequate debate and consideration. One of our colleagues in Roanoke, he's a CPA and a small business owner. He was able to go through and figure out, and I won't quote the number because I don't remember exactly, but it was millions of dollars it would cost Roanoke County in the minimum wage increase because of, think about this, if you're a locality, think of your parks and recreation programs, the number of part-time students or part-time employees you hire in the high peak seasons, lifeguards, landscape people, all like those folks are generally not paid minimum wage or above, somewhere in there. Many of us remember when we were in high school and college, we worked in those entry-level jobs and they were minimum wage because that's the value we return to those. So if you're a locality and you now all of a sudden have to pay these substantially higher wages to achieve those, are you going to continue the services? If you are, where are you going to get the money? Where you can get the money from your citizens. And so it's not just a business issue. It's an overall cost of living in our society. And that's the part that didn't get discussed adequately.
Thank you all for those comments. I know we're right up against it. We did have a question related to unemployment, and I think it kind of dovetails from what we were talking about with workforce. We're seeing a massive number of people file for unemployment right now in the state of Virginia. Are people qualifying and receiving those payments? And maybe just as importantly, what impact do we think this is going to have on our state budget going forward?
Well, Quentin, for my office, we're fielding those kind of questions about every day. What we're seeing is folks that are maybe not filing, sole proprietors and so forth like that maybe didn't sign up. They weren't aware of the other programs that were out there. And so we're trying to assist them and get them pointed in the right direction. Had a conversation with someone the other day. His wife was having trouble even getting in contact with the employment commission, and just out of frustration, they're not doing anything. So, well, sure, they're doing something, but as you stated, when you're inundated to the level that the agency is, now I've had problems with the employment commission over the years, but I think we need to understand it's just impossible to gear up to the level that they need to get everybody for the proper waiting time and so forth. It's just impossible. They're swamped. They're covered. I believe that by and large, they're doing the best they can. And so, I've been happy. Our office has worked hard to make connections with folks, getting them to the right place and trying to get them some of the, basic information that they're looking for. Am I going to get my benefit, or am I not going to get it? But as far as the budget, we're going to be going back to Richmond. I don't know, maybe July, something like that. We're going to have to relook at the books. There's just no way that we're going to. Last week, I think as Senator pointed out, basically the governor said, "Okay, everything that was in the budget, we're the expense of the increases, we're pulling those back. We're not going to spend that extra money." He's also told the various agencies to be looking how they can cut and so forth. And so we're going to be dealing with that coming. It's in flux, much like our localities. You know, they're passing budgets now just to say they got a budget, but they're going to be looking at us, but they're also going to be looking at their own revenues, how they're going to be affected. So it's just really fluid right now.
Thanks a lot, Tony. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate everyone. Sarah, I think we're at the time limit. We want to cut it off now?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in too. Just sorry about that, Sarah. Just jump right in there. But yeah, I think we told everybody 9. It is a little after, and I'd love to keep going another half hour, but I know some people have some things to do, so we'll go ahead and wrap it up. Thank you very much, Quentin, for handling that. Tony, Chris is still on the line. I'm not sure Rob joined back in, but thank Rob, and Mark just dropped off a little while ago. So again, we appreciate everyone being here. And Quentin, do you have any parting comments, or does that about do it?
Nope, that does it for me. Thank you to everybody. Really appreciate it.
Well, thanks to everybody, and let's get out there and restart that economy.
Let's go. Thanks all.
Have a good day.
Take care.